welcome to the backup channel for MJ Victims, MJ Victims, etc. Tonight we're going to do something a little bit fun. Every so often I'll do this. I'll watch a video from the what I call the other side, the detractors. I actually watch a lot of them because I do a lot of research on it. But sometimes the interview is just so bad. And sometimes the interview is just so, I keep on using the word powder puff and just really, really, I don't even know what to call it. Amateurish, I would probably use the word, that I have to just, do my commentary on it. I don't think there's going to be a lot of people watching tonight because I'm kind of doing this last minute. I didn't really put out a whole lot of information. But I'm going to be, that was going live. So some people might be watching this later. I'll post it to the Facebook page. But essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this interview from a person by the name of John Ziegler, is his name, John Ziegler. And he is, I'm assuming he's a journalist and whatnot. And he seems to very much be a very staunch defender of Michael Jackson. And as you can see here, this is a picture of John Ziegler with Tom Mesereau and, chumming it up. So I think we can kind of get an idea where this interview is going to be going. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the interview and stop and pause it. It's about a 30-minute interview, so this will probably be like an hour and a half because by the time I do the commentary and things like that, it will probably be around that time frame. I might get a chance to look at comments tonight. Like I said, I don't think there's going to be many people in here, just because I'm doing this at the last minute. But it is going to be somewhat of a more lighthearted type of live stream. The last one was very, very the exact opposite. Actually, it was very serious. But let's take a listen. So I'm going to go over here to this interview and gonna make sure I can find it. Just give me a moment here. I have to have it load. And what we'll do is, like I said, we'll kind of stop and pause and take a sort of slowly look at how the interview has been put together and whatnot. I'm just trying to get that interview up here. Here we go. Okay, so here it is. And this was done, it looks like 4 days ago. So I remember listening to it and literally just like nodding my head through the whole thing going, oh, you got to be kidding me. So again, this is part one. I guess this is going to be part two. And let me get this so the volume's up. Let's make sure I'm Okay.
Tom Mesereau.
Here we go. Sorry about that.
I'm here with Tom Mesereau, the famed defense attorney for Michael Jackson from his 2005 criminal trial, to talk about the Leaving Neverland movie on HBO. Tom, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for inviting me. Always a pleasure.
It's always great to talk to you. And one of the things I want to talk about first is there's this notion that Dan Reed, the director of Leaving Neverland, has put out there, that there's this Jackson machine ready to destroy anyone who dares to question the narrative of this film. And I laugh at that because you and I have been in touch for quite a while, and I know that if there was a Jackson machine, you would have been paid to be on every television show possible as soon as this movie came out, but you were actually on trial yourself and unable to immediately respond. Is that an accurate?
First of all, I love the fact that he talks about the Jackson machine. And because Tom Mesereau isn't being paid by the Jackson estate, that somehow means that there is no Jackson machine. Well, why pay somebody that's going to go on willingly to all the sycophant shows, all the various outlets, and talk about Michael Jackson in a very positive light and basically do it for nothing? Why would you bother paying that person? And what do you really think that Tom Mesereau doesn't get anything out of this? Are you really that serious, Mr. Ziegler? Do you really think that Tom Mesereau doesn't get anything out of the fact that he defended Michael Jackson was successful in that? You don't think that gave him stature, that gave him other high-profile cases, that puts him in a totally different league? Do you really think that he needs the Michael Jackson estate to pay him? I said this before and I'll say it again. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Why would you drop off the Michael Jackson, gravy train if you're Tom Mesereau, when you can sit there and continually tout how wonderful Michael Jackson is and how wonderful you are for defending him and beating him and winning the case? So, again, let me go further. Trust me, there's a lot in this interview. It's rather somewhat laughable. So let's go further.
I wasn't on trial. I was in a trial.
You're in a trial. Good clarification.
I was defending someone,
right?
Which is my profession. That's what I do. Look, Michael Jackson was at one point the most famous person on the planet. He was incomparable in terms of his talent, his influence on music, on dance, on choreography. He has millions of fans all over the world. He has a very lucrative estate that the lawyers for the estate have built up, and he has many supporters. But, we live in the era of Me Too. We live in the era of media doing what media wants.
Okay. Again, this is a very big talking point for Tom Mesereau. In the era of Me Too. So what was the era before that, Tom? So before that, what we had was that if you came forward and you made an accusation against somebody that was very powerful, rich, and famous, you were either A, you were basically squashed by their lawyers into silence. You were B, you were basically either paid off to be quiet because you didn't think you had any chance whatsoever of being heard. You were C, you were embarrassed, you were shamed, you were ridiculed, you were essentially considered a pariah. So what did we have before this? So you're painting the fact that people finally have the courage to come out against some very high public figures, including Harvey Weinstein, and including somebody that you lost the case on, Bill Cosby, miserably, by the way. He didn't even want, from what I can gather, I don't think he even wanted you back to do the appeals. You lost that miserably. Because you're playing the same playbook that you played way back in the day, 1993 and 2005. So, what do you think, seriously, what do you think is going to happen in that situation? What we're dealing with now is people finally saying enough is enough. Your money, your influence, your wealth, the amount of lawyers you hire, we don't care anymore. If you're going to commit these crimes and you're going to hire Tom Mesereau, what outlet do we have? It's called social media, and it is called, and the reality is the media hadn't been doing a good job in this. Harvey Weinstein went doing what he did for how many years? Jeffrey Epstein went doing what he did for how many years? I mean, we still have people from Nickelodeon that there is the Dan Schneiders of the world that are going really unchecked in many ways in some very serious allegations. So I think it's laughable that you would bring something like that up, especially since you did in the past and you lost because of it. So let's go further.
The idea that somebody is controlling the media about Michael Jackson is utterly ridiculous. I mean, when I walked into his defense in 2004, what I saw was so disturbing to me. and that was that the worldwide media had condemned him, they were attacking him, they had already convicted him.
Let's think about that for a second. Michael Jackson in 2003, 2004, 2005, he was accused for a second time, Tom. Not a first, a second time that we knew of at that point. It was technically 3 times he was accused, and possibly even more, according to Jim Clemente. So, a media is looking at somebody who is acting incredibly inappropriate with children, and who is flaunting it in many ways, which he did in the Martin Bashir video, and is finally being brought to task for that. Now, you talk about, well, the media went all over Michael Jackson. Well, what happened in the 1980s during the Thriller years? The media was fawning over Michael Jackson. So it's amazing how when the media turns around and takes a look at somebody and actually decides, you know what, this behavior is not okay, and they decide to take a deeper look, and in many ways, it's how the media operates. They do the pluses and the minuses. They go back and forth. That's how they operate. But it wasn't 100% negative coverage on Michael Jackson for his whole life. And a lot of the stories, the kind of bizarre stories that were put out there, were put out by Michael Jackson to create this image of him being eccentric and way out there. And even Lisa Marie Presley talks about this. He wanted to be P.T. Barnum. So, you know, you talk about the media like somehow they're to blame for Michael Jackson's own doing. And this is the thing you'll never do, Tom. You'll never ever put responsibility on Michael Jackson. And that's where you lose credibility. You lose it as soon as you put these things out there without actually being reflective on how he was acting. Let's go further.
They tried to convict him during the trial with their coverage. They tried to convict him during jury deliberations when major networks were showing the jail cells they thought he was going to go to and that kind of thing. So anyone who tells me that the pro-Jackson forces control the world media when it comes to Michael Jackson it's laughable. It's ridiculous.
And it is, and part.
Let's pause it there. After Michael Jackson's death, for a span of a decade, you heard nothing but, for the most part, positive news about Michael Jackson's legacy. You had all these tribute shows. You had, when you would Google Michael Jackson, because what happens is algorithms. And maybe, Tom, you need to educate yourself on how the internet actually works. So what happens is that you can have people put out stories that will, because of the way they trend, will bump out any other information. So when I was discussing Wade Robson in 2013, and the only really media coverage it got was a Today interview and then a whole bunch of stuff from Radar Online, TMZ, a lot of the, what they call tabloid type of coverage. And then you would put in Wade Robson's name, and basically what would come up would be all things about Michael Jackson and the positive things he'd done. So what it was doing was it was throwing off all those stories. And that's how, when you use Google, or if you use some of these search engines, Bing or whatever it might be, that's what can happen. Now, even now, what happens is when you put in the word Wade Robson, you will then start seeing stories about the train station, about inconsistencies. Because what's happening is that the estate, in my belief, knows how to use these algorithms, knows how to use these search engines to throw people off from the story. And another prime example of that is when Leaving Neverland first came out, by the way. You would look up Leaving Neverland, and what would come out would be some teenager's version of a parody version of the trailer. And it would come up in every search site you would go to. And this was something that was essentially, making fun of the documentary, calling it into question, but that's what you would see. How do you think that happens, Tom? Do you think it happens by accident? You don't think that there are people in that billion-dollar estate that have PR people and that people understand how the internet works, that maybe you should actually do a little education on yourself? They don't understand that fact. And this is why this time is so crucial right now, because that story can change so quickly. Because what they tend to do, it's a very slow, methodical process of chipping away at the information. And this is why the people that are behind Wade Robson and James Safechuck, they need to continually understand how this can quickly distort and change what's the good work that's been done. But let's go further.
Part of that narrative, though, of course, what I'm trying to set straight is you're not being paid to do interviews on behalf of the Jackson estate. You're not held on retainer by them. You're doing this because you believe in the truth.
Yes, and I believe in the experience that I had with one of the accusers.
Pause it there. So he's saying he's doing this basically because he believes in the truth. Well, the reality is Tom, you still benefit from this. Your legacy of a lawyer is based really on that Michael Jackson case. That's one of the biggest case you really did. So if that gets turned over and people find out that, wait a second, there was a whole lot more to this story, and you actually were defending somebody who committed some of the most heinous crimes you can think of, Tom, how does that affect your legacy? And this idea that you're just a sort of philanthropic, altruistic type individual that just wants Michael Jackson's name to be kept so pristine, your name is tied to his name. There's no getting around it. So to say that you don't have a self-interest, really, in my opinion, is disingenuous. But let's go further.
I interviewed Wade Robson for hours before he testified. I interviewed his mother and daughter before they testified. I called all three as witnesses. They were among the most powerful witnesses in support of Michael Jackson. Mr. Robson was a very articulate, likable, intelligent, seemed like a nice person. He was adamant that Michael Jackson had never done anything improper towards him at any time. The mother and sister backed him up. They had traveled with Wade and Michael Jackson. They had slept in Michael Jackson's bed. They said nothing improper ever happened. And they were so strongly in favor of Michael Jackson and so strongly against the prosecution of Michael Jackson that I made them all star witnesses for the defense. So I interviewed them. I chatted with them at length. Then I called them as witnesses. They testified under oath. I only know my portion of this, and that is that these people were adamant that nothing improper had ever happened.
I love how he says, I only know my portion of this. Well, Tom, I've seen many interviews that you've done on Jordan Chandler, James Safechuck, etc. You tend to not just talk about your portion, Tom. You tend to talk about the whole kit and caboodle here. And I've seen it many, many times. But the reality is the fact that you interviewed them and you found them credible and you found that there was no holes or anything that you could do doesn't mean that Wade Robson was not basically telling you something that you wanted to hear. He wasn't ready to come forward. And I keep on stating this. When you're not ready to disclose, nothing is going to change that. You're not going to change it, Tom. Get over yourself. Other people are not going to change it. Prosecutors are not going to change it. If he's not going to tell his own wife, he's not going to tell his own mother, he's not going to tell his friends and family, what makes it think that you're going to somehow pull it out of him? And the reality is when people aren't ready to disclose, guess what? They make very, very convincing liars because you're trying to protect, again, I keep on stating this, the most important interest, which is your self-being. It's, when you're dealing with things like this, the idea of self-preservation is the most strongest thing you have. And if you feel that it's going to harm you in any way, your mind kicks in and says, no, I'm not going to release that information. But let's go further. Trust me, this interview gets even more interesting.
Let's take a closer look at that, because to believe the narrative in Leaving Neverland, especially with regard to Wade Robson, you have to believe that you, Tom Mesereau, are a moron, essentially.
Stop there. No, I'm joking.
Because you took a guy who had been abused for 7 years by your client and made him and his family the centerpiece of your defense. Are you not personally offended by that?
Well,
stop it there. This is where John Ziegler, you really need to pick up your skills here. Do you really think that if Michael Jackson raped Wade Robson. And Wade Robson said, I don't want to testify. Do you really think he's going to keep that loose end out there? Do you think he's going to keep that loose cannon that can maybe come forward at any time, especially Wade Robson at that time, who was at the top of his game and who people knew, who he was doing choreography for very famous individuals, including bands like NSYNC and Britney Spears and etc. All these things were happening for him. Do you really think Michael Jackson is going to leave that a loose end? Seriously. Don't you think that Michael Jackson, if he thought he had Wade Robson testify for him in 1993, and he now knows that Wade Robson, at that point, has his career, everything, his life tied around Michael Jackson, that he's not going to try to convince Wade Robson that this is not a good idea to speak out, and to try to convince him that they don't really understand what we had going on, that the society isn't going to understand. Do you really think he's going to keep that loose end there? Seriously. And do you really think that Tom Mesereau is not going to be fooled by Michael Jackson, in the sense of that he's going to bring out Wade Robson and basically bring him out to defend him, and that Michael Jackson isn't going to make sure that all his I's are dotted and T's are crossed, that he's not going to make sure that Wade behaves the way that Michael Jackson wants him to behave? You really seriously want me to believe that? Let's go further.
It was more than that. I had to think long and hard about whether we needed to put on a defense case at all. In American criminal courtrooms, the prosecution must prove their case beyond any reasonable doubt. And that means they must prove every element of a charged offense beyond any reasonable doubt. I had so many effective cross-examinations during the prosecution's case that I had to think long and hard about whether we needed to put on a defense.
Why does that matter, Tom? You did put on a defense. Why are you sitting there going through the machinations of your mind? I was so wonderful during these cross-examinations. I had one. You put on a defense because you needed to put on a defense. You came to that decision. That's already now a foregone conclusion. That's already a conclusion. You don't need to go into your mindset. It's irrelevant. You made the decision. So obviously, if you put on a defense, there was a reason for it. Now, you might not tell us, but it's irrelevant. But of course, John Ziegler would just let him go on, definitely not interrupt or ask any pertinent questions. But let's go further.
We could have rested right there and not called a single witness. But I concluded that we would probably have gotten a hung jury at that point, that we had to tell our own story, and we needed our own witnesses in support of Michael, and we had a lot of them. They were very powerful witnesses. So I elected to put on a defense. When a defense lawyer in a criminal case elects to put on a defense, you typically want to start strong and end strong.
How many times have we heard that line? Really, it should be on a bumper sticker. Tom, you should put on a bumper sticker. Maybe you should actually coin that phrase. Start strong and end strong. See if you can get a trademark for that, because every interview you use when you're discussing Michael Jackson, that's what you bring up. I needed to start strong and I needed to end strong. I don't know if Chris Tucker was the best ending, but I guess in your mind he was. But anyways, let's go further. It's unbelievable.
And I started with a very strong witness, Wade Robson. I ended with also a very strong witness, Chris Tucker. And I wouldn't have called this person as my first witness if I hadn't felt he was really strong and would start off the defense case in a very compelling manner. And he did. He testified emphatically that he had not been abused, improperly touched in any way. He was subjected to a very strong, powerful cross-examination by Ron Zonin, an excellent prosecutor for the Santa Barbara County District Attorney's Office.
And Ron Zonin feels that Michael Jackson was guilty, by the way, just to throw that out there. And he thought that Ron Zonin also felt that Wade Robson wasn't being forthcoming when he was cross-examining him. So, again, yes. But again, I keep on stating, if you're not willing to disclose, guess what? Tom, you're not going to be able to pull out of him. Ron Zonin's not going to be able to get it out of him. His own family, his own girlfriend at the time, his mother, if they're not going to know, what makes you think that you're somehow going to do it, or Ron Zonen's going to come and do it? You guys got to get over yourselves. You got to understand how disclosure works. You don't. I don't think, my personal belief is I don't think you want to. I really do. I believe you don't want to, because then that would actually mean maybe having empathy for the people that maybe are being affected by the other people you're getting off. So let's go further.
Stood that cross-examination. His mother and sister were in a similar position. I called them early in the defense case. They were powerful witnesses for Michael Jackson, powerful in their statements that nothing improper had happened as far as they knew, and they all were subjected to cross-examination. So I started our defense case very strong with one of the most powerful witnesses I had seen in favor of Michael Jackson, and that was Mr. Wade Robson.
And what you just said there is really important, because the whole essence of Wade Robson's current story in Leaving Neverland is that he's not claiming repressed memories suddenly hit him in his 30s, that he was abused by Michael Jackson. He's claiming that he didn't understand what had happened was quote-unquote sexual abuse. But that's not what he was asked at trial. He wasn't asked just, hey, did anything bad ever happen with you and Michael? He was asked very specific questions about physical acts, which he very strongly declared did not happen, correct?
And again, Mr. Ziegler, what you don't seem to understand, because you probably haven't done any research on how abuse victims react to these things, what Wade Robson is stating is that at that period of time, he was convincing himself internally that what Michael Jackson did to him was something special. And he wasn't going to come forward and basically out Michael Jackson and have him go to jail. That's what he was doing. He was protecting somebody because he felt that what had happened to him wasn't really abuse. It wasn't really all that bad. And that's what happens when you are a victim. You minimize it. And, you know, Oprah put this very well. A lot of times what happens, people come forward when they know that maybe it's a sibling or somebody else is being hurt or abused. When they really know what's happening. And I'm talking about Gavin Arvizo here. I'm talking about when they truly understand and they have accepted the fact that maybe someone else is getting harmed. He wasn't at that point. And that's the problem what you don't seem to understand. I don't think you have a will, but or you do and you're just sort of placating Tom Mesereau. I don't know. But let's go further.
Absolutely. He was very, very powerful in his testimony that nothing, directly or indirectly, that's improper had ever happened to him. He wasn't improperly touched. He wasn't improperly fondled. He wasn't improperly molested. We went through all of this in direct examination, and he was subjected to a powerful cross-examination. And he was a stalwart witness in support of Michael Jackson's innocence. He was one of the strongest I heard. That's why I called him first.
And in making that decision, I'm assuming something here, and I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong. I'm assuming you would consult your client, Michael Jackson, about his experiences with Wade and whether or not he thought it was a good idea to put Wade on the stand. Did that happen?
I mean, obviously, I don't want to go into privileged information, but obviously Michael Jackson knew Wade was going to be my first witness.
Of course, and obviously Michael Jackson didn't want Wade Robson not to testify. Again, do you want to have a loose end if you're Michael Jackson and you have somebody like Wade Robson who stated in the documentary that he really didn't want to testify? Do you want that person to maybe then come forward and say, you know what, it's time that I disclose this information? You know, maybe he sees information about the trial on television. Maybe the prosecution gets really hard and subpoenas Wade Robson. And then now you have him being subpoenaed by the prosecution to come forward. Do you really want that to happen? If you're Michael Jackson, you're going to understand Michael Jackson's not an attorney. You know, Michael Jackson is somebody who I believe was a predator, and he's in a situation now that's what we call panic mode, I'm sure, where he's trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to do to make sure that nobody says anything? What do I have to do to make sure that nobody comes forward? Do you leave Wade Robson essentially dangling in the wind, or do you make sure that you bring him in, rein him in, and make sure he does your bidding? Doesn't that make a little bit more sense? Let's go further.
Obviously told him about that, and he had no problem with that at all. I mean, Wade was a strong, powerful supporter of Michael Jackson and maintained that he had been to Neverland, he had associated with Michael, he had traveled with Michael, and nothing improper had ever happened at any time. He was so strong, I mean, I made him our first witness for a reason.
But just to further clarify that, the narrative in Leaving Neverland is Michael Jackson is a criminal mastermind. And I look at that and wait, well, hold on a second. If a criminal, you can't have him be a criminal mastermind and also have him allow you to put a guy he abused for 7 years on the stand first, right? I mean,
that is actually the definition of criminal mastermind. You rein in somebody that you know that might actually be a potential kink in the armor, a chink in the armor, and what you do is you then convince that person to testify for you by whatever means necessary. And then you present it to your attorney, Tom Mesereau, and you make him believe, well, this is somebody that spent all this time with me, and guess what? Nothing happened. And then Tom Mesereau laps it up and thinks, oh, this guy is he's the greatest witness ever. And then that creates the narrative. That's the most criminal mastermind thing you could possibly do. Yes, it makes him a criminal mastermind. It's absolutely diabolical in its description. But that's what Michael Jackson not only did, but had to do, Mr. Ziegler. You don't seem to grasp that. What do you think he's going to do? I keep on stating this. Just let Wade Robson, maybe he decides to come forward and testify against me. Because if Wade Robson testified against Michael Jackson, guess what, Mr. Ziegler? He would be, just like Jim Clemente has stated, in jail. He would be in jail. No doubt about it, because a person at that point, when he was at his level, a person who was essentially fairly famous at that time, it would not have been a good look. And Tom Mesereau should probably be thanking Wade Robson for the fact that he wasn't ready to disclose. Because just like Bill Cosby, Tom Mesereau wouldn't have gone down in flames. Okay? So let's go further. This is the most powder puff interview. I wish you could have some sort of perspective. God, it's like there's no sense of pushback, nothing. It's just let Tom Mesereau give his talking points.
Those are contradictory narratives, are
that
they
not?
That
would be a version of insanity, and that's not what I did.
Right.
I was there to win. I was there to win for an innocent person, and the jury saw it our way for many.
And Tom Mesereau, you were hoodwinked. Period. You were hoodwinked. Michael Jackson, I hate to say, was probably more intelligent than you. Because you're sitting here now in 2019 still defending him. You have now 8 accusers. You have a plethora of information that shows that Michael Jackson spent an inordinate amount of time with children alone in a bedroom. You have a person who fits the profile in many ways of somebody who has a predatory interest, for children. You have somebody that had paid out 2 cash settlements. You had somebody who essentially was not only was he, you got to realize when we talk about Gavin Arvizo, he was brought up on charges against Gavin Arvizo. They investigated and brought up charges against Gavin Arvizo when it comes to Gavin Arvizo. And you're still going out there trying to salvage whatever little left you're going to have. I made this statement years ago when I started the page in 2013. I said, Tom Mesereau, here's how I see you right now. You are literally standing on the train tracks. The Michael Jackson train is coming barreling down the tracks. You're standing there going, la, 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 with your arms folded. Oh, nothing's going to happen. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. Nothing's going to happen. That train keeps on barreling down those tracks. You stand there with your arms folded. And that train is going to run right. It's going to crush you and crush you really hard. It's going to run right through you. Because the Michael Jackson train or the Michael Jackson machine doesn't care. It doesn't care about your legacy, Tom. Doesn't care. It just keeps on doing what it has to do. And if it means that you go down with that legacy, then you go down. And you don't seem to understand that. But keep on doing what you're doing and keep on, putting those blinders on. But eventually you're going to see, and if Jim Clemente is being forthcoming in when he states there's going to be new accusers coming forward that we haven't heard of before, that are very credible, you really better buckle up. And you might want to actually get it back on the platform instead of standing there on the train tracks. But we'll go further. This is, God,
Many reasons.
so bad.
Now, continuing with Wade's claim that what his testimony was about, I don't even know if you're aware, but in both of his lawsuit and in Leaving Neverland, Wade specifically claims he received a subpoena to testify in the 2005 trial, as if he did so against his own wishes, like he was forced to testify. Does that...
This is a great part of the interview. He's leading Tom Mesereau on, but doesn't quite go the way he wants. Let's take a listen.
shock you to hear that allegation by Wade Robson?
It does shock me. Now, typically in a criminal case, if we need a witness, we will typically ask the witness, do you want a subpoena or not? Some people do because they have employment responsibilities. They want to be able to tell their employer, I have a subpoena, I have to testify. And very often they don't need a subpoena. And my understanding of Wade Robson was he didn't need a subpoena at all. He and his mother and sister all came to Neverland ready to voluntarily support Michael Jackson in and outside the courtroom. And that's what they did.
So the best of your knowledge, then, Wade is not telling the truth when he claims to have gotten a subpoena to testify.
I don't recall whether anyone handed him a subpoena.
Stop it there. I don't recall. That's that's something we should make a T-shirt out of. When someone says I don't recall, that is a sign of a weakling. Okay, I don't recall. That is a sign of somebody not being forthcoming. I don't recall. Tom, you recalled everything else. You recalled everything else. You supposedly were the spearhead of the successful campaign that got Michael Jackson acquitted, but yet you don't recall if a subpoena went out for Wade Robson. And what's funny is John Ziegler was hoping that this was going to be a slam dunk, and that Tom Mesereau would say, "Oh, it never happened." Sorry, John. Sorry. That's not the case. So let's go further.
Or not. What I do know is he didn't require one because he was willing to help Michael Jackson at all times. He was willing to be there when needed. That was always my understanding. Whether anyone actually filled out a subpoena and gave him one, or whether he even requested one, I really don't know.
So there's your answer, John. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. And the fact that he sits there and says, I don't recall, it doesn't really bode that well.
And let's talk about the rest of his family, too, because his mother is a key figure in this story. She's the one that effectively facilitated the relationship between Wade and Michael Jackson. It is my belief that we have found some information about her on Facebook that discredits her current story, that she was still a fan of Michael Jackson well after Wade comes forward on the Today Show in 2013. What do you recall about her testimony and the testimony of her daughter as well, who you called in the 2000?
John, you better be very careful with that information, Mr. Ziegler. It better be airtight because unlike Michael Jackson, Wade Robson and Joy Robson are still alive. So you better hope that that information is airtight and sealed. And that you know for certain the dates that it was put out, that what exactly she was stating, what the reasoning for her stating what she was stating. You better be very, very careful, and careful how you tread, Mr. Ziegler. You really better be. Because this is not a case of we're talking about Michael Jackson here. This is two people that are very much alive. And you want to continue to go down that road, that's your choice. But we'll just leave it at that. Let's go further.
Well, I just recall that the mother and sister were very supportive of Wade and his testimony in favor of Michael Jackson. As I recall, and I haven't been through their testimony in years, but as I recall, they traveled with Michael and Wade. They were in the bed with Michael and Wade, sometimes sleeping in Michael's huge bed. this notion that he had a normal-sized bed is absurd. We prove that parents, siblings, all would sack out on Michael's bed. It was almost like a communal thing. But my understanding...
Oh, so, again, this is what Tom Mesereau does. What he does is he lays the framework and the picture, and that this was not Michael Jackson taking little boys into hotel rooms or into his condominium or sleeping alone at the child's own home or showing up at one of the parent's studio apartment and sleeping on the pull-out sofa bed with the child. No. This is a big, huge bed and a huge 3,000 square foot bedroom. Okay? I love the fact that it's just so, it's the same old narrative over and over again. But let's go further.
Understanding was that they were very supportive of him. They never detected anything improper, never suspected anything improper. That has always been my understanding of what they brought to the table in that trial.
Now, in the bigger picture, what I find really disturbing, and I'm fascinated to hear your view, is that HBO and Dan Reed have taken Wade Robson's story as if it's gospel and just effectively determined that his testimony in 2005, as strong and as specific as it was, is irrelevant. As a lawyer, not just the lawyer of this case, but a lawyer in general who reveres the law and the standards of testimony and under oath and perjury, I find that incredibly insulting and dangerous to the entire system, that once you make your declaration in the public under oath in a criminal trial of that magnitude, you can't go back and change your story.
Really, Mr. Ziegler, because you find the fact that a victim that can't come forward, that can't testify, that can't be forthcoming because they're not ready, because they're dealing with trauma, that is the most awful thing in the world. Are you numb in the head? Seriously. You think that's an awful thing? That somebody that has been raped for 7 years, because that's what child abuse is. Let's call it what it is. It's rape. That somehow them not being able to come forward when you want them to come forward, or when the state wants them to come forward, or when a prosecutor, or when a defense attorney, or whoever wants them. That's the worst thing in the whole world. You know what's worse? Is the person that rapes the individual and puts them in a position where they can't come forward. It's unreal what people who are victims of child abuse and adult victims of rape have to deal with on a daily basis. It's unreal. Let's go further.
Remember, one of the top sex crimes prosecutors in America, Ron Zonin, and I've never faced a better prosecutor than him. He was really just a passionate, skilled, experienced, determined prosecutor. He subjected Wade Robson to withering cross-examination.
And Ron Zonin believes that Wade Robson wasn't being forthcoming, and Ron Zonin believes that Michael Jackson was guilty of the crimes. You don't seem to mention that, Tom. You don't seem to mention that. You just seem to, you praise Ron Zonin because it helps you. Let's be honest. If he's the best prosecutor and the best you've ever faced, and that means the case that you won is even stronger. Again, you got to understand how these people lay these things out. A lot of it's very self-satisfying. And unless you understand how a lot of these people, and I'm going to call him an egomaniac because that's what I think he is, personal opinion, is about bolstering his own reputation, his own legacy. But let's go further. Again, this is just pathetically bad. Let's go further.
And this man knew how to question a sex crimes witness, and he could not shake Wade Robson. Wade Robson stood his ground, maintained his story under all sorts of pressure, and was also adamant, always adamant, that Michael Jackson never improperly touched him.
But isn't it, Tom, dangerous that the media and a major media outlet like HBO and this film, which is being seen worldwide, is just pretending as if adult testimony under oath doesn't matter? Like you can go back on that. That to me, at what point do we reach chaos if that's going to be accepted?
John, grow up. Seriously, grow up. Again, read a book on trauma. Read a book on how rape victims react to these things. You know, if you're supposed to be such an educated person, how can you not be educated on that topic? Seriously, you're shocked that somebody actually be abused and not want to be forthcoming with what happened to them. It happens every single day. It happens when a police officer goes to a home and asks the child, did your father abuse you, or did your aunt or uncle or whoever abuse you? No, never happened. It happens when children get brought into court and they don't want to be separated from their mother or their father, and they say nothing happened. Or when they're older and they don't want to deal with the fact that maybe something happened. So they don't say anything. They don't tell anybody in their family. They go to family reunions. They go to family events and they just pretend that everything's okay. You know, you don't seem to understand that just because something happens in a court of law where somebody's questioning you about it, that somehow is the measuring stick. No, it's what happens in your everyday life, John. When you're dealing with it on a daily basis, and maybe you're seeing that person on a daily basis, and you're trying to pretend that nothing has happened because you don't want to disrupt your family or the people around you. You can't gather that. You want to put it in the context of just it being in a court of law. Well, the court of law is a very small part in that time frame. There's a whole bunch outside of that time frame, which you don't seem to understand, and you probably never will, and that's what bothers me. Let's go further.
Well, all I know is my slice of life. All I know is the person that I spoke to, the person who I call as a witness, and there's no doubt in my mind he was telling the truth.
It just seems to me, though, that if we accept the notion that your past testimonies, I mean, as a defense lawyer, you know, if someone in before the current era we're living in, if you had someone who testified to something directly contradictory to what they're currently saying, that's game, set, match. That's ball game, right?
Well, I mean, again, people will change their stories for various reasons, and they will come up with reasons to justify it. I mean, human beings have a great ability to justify to themselves whatever kind of behavior they want. But all I know is I spoke to him for hours. He testified on the stand. It was the most watched trial of my lifetime. You had more accredited media from around the world than O.J. Simpson and Scott Peterson combined.
And Tom, you don't really think that that's a reason for him not to come forward? That he has this spotlight on him? That people are he's going to come forward and say that Michael Jackson, and I'm not trying to be rude here, but a very effeminate individual, somehow overpowered him and essentially took away his masculinity. Because that's what happens if you're a heterosexual male and you've been abused. What happens is when you come forward, people can be like, how the heck did you allow Michael Jackson to do this? You must not be a man. And that's what happens in the minds of survivors. Now you have an international audience looking at this. You have somebody who is trying to keep a career, has a new girlfriend he's trying to have a relationship with. He's trying to show that he is his own person, and you expect that person to come forward at that time. It doesn't work that way. This is why you don't understand disclosure. Disclosure doesn't happen on your timetables, people. It happens when the person is ready to disclose. And you can have the best prosecutor in the world. If your own girlfriend, wife, mother, family can't get it out, you think Ron Zonin is really any competition? Don't think so. Let's go further. And it's pretty bad. I hate to say it.
He was in the spotlight in that courtroom and subjected to withering, persistent, skilled, professional, experienced cross-examination, and he was adamant that Michael Jackson had not improperly treated him.
And every day he was put to that test. Every single day. And every day he didn't come forward. Again, Ron Zonin is no match when it comes to family, friends, coworkers, people you know. You don't think that Wade Robson was asked many times by people he knew if he was abused? You don't think that happened? That maybe friends he didn't really ever touch you, did he? You don't think that question ever came up? And do you really think that Wade Robson, or James Safechuck, if they felt at that point in time that they could come forward, they wouldn't have? They didn't come forward because they weren't ready to. That's how it works. And even James Safechuck, he didn't testify in that case. He knew that he wasn't going to go up against Michael Jackson because he knew what Michael Jackson was. He was a very powerful entity. And he wasn't willing to do it. And it's just unbelievable the amount of just leeway Mr. John Ziegler, the Zigmanfreud, as we call him. I think it's more Zigmanfreud, but we will leave it at that. Comes up with. It's just ridiculous.
He was an adult who was very well versed in what sex was and had been in numerous high-profile romantic relationships. This was not a naive guy.
No, this was someone, in my opinion, very intelligent, very articulate, very perceptive, seemed very likable, and didn't look to me like he was making anything up.
You know who's also very intelligent and very perceptive was Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards, who was in the movie Top Gun. He was in a huge series called ER. Very famous, very intelligent, well-read, well-spoken. And guess what? He never came forward and talked about Garth Ancier. So does that mean that because he didn't come forward that he's not intelligent? That he's not a type of person that actually was somebody who was articulate? No, it means that he wasn't ready to come forward. The two, guess what, are not mutually exclusive. The two don't have to exist on different parallels. Let's go forward.
Now let's turn to James Safechuck. I know you didn't interview James Safechuck because James Safechuck had been determined by the judge to not be eligible to testify.
This is another part of the interview which doesn't quite go John Ziegler's way. Let's take a listen.
2005 trial. Yet in Leaving Neverland, he tells a very detailed story that is critical to the narrative that both Michael Jackson and Michael Jackson's attorneys were contacting him into the late stages of the trial, effectively begging him to testify, which he refused to do. That, to me, sounds completely contradictory to what we know as the factual record. How does that sound in comparison to your recollection of the events of 2005?
It makes no sense because the prosecution wanted to bring in witnesses to suggest that Mr. Safechuck was molested. The judge would not let them do that. At that point, the defense had no necessity to bring in Mr. Safechuck. In fact, it would have been insane. If we had called Mr. Safechuck, that would have opened the door for the prosecution to call witnesses they claimed would have testified that he had been molested. So this story doesn't make any sense to me. Now, I know I didn't contact him. Did someone behind my back contact him in a way that made no sense? I can't speak for that.
So you can't speak for your employees, people that are under your observation, Mr. Mesereau. Are you serious? This is somebody who's supposed to be one of the best attorneys money can buy, defense attorneys, and you don't know what your underlings are doing around you? You don't have your hand in every little part of this? Again, you got to listen to how these people frame things. When somebody doesn't give it definitive and say, listen, that never happened. I was in charge of that operation. I was in charge of the defense. I would know if somebody went behind my back and did that. It's rather suspect. And the reality is that James also talked about how Michael Jackson called him. Again, I keep on stating, Michael Jackson did not want to have any loose cannons out there that possibly could be a problem. So, of course, he kept them close to him. It's part of the control aspect. But again, of course, John Ziegler won't ask that question. Powder puff, John. Powder puff. This is not journalism. This is not even commentary. This is literally you giving. Why don't you you and Ron, you can sit there and you can put on softball outfits. You can literally put on he can put on a softball outfit. You can put on a softball outfit, and you can have a game of softball because that's what you're doing. You're giving him a softball interview. You and him can have a game of softball just yourselves, and you can just let him run around the bases, scoring home runs without even, hitting a ball. I mean, that's essentially what you're doing. But let's go further. I mean, this is so bad. It's ridiculous.
But I know it makes no sense to think the defense was planning to call Mr. Safechuck. It would have been insane.
And it is a fact that Mr. Safechuck had been declared by the judge well before the trial began as off limits, correct?
Well, off limits for the prosecution.
That's the key point. Off limits for the prosecution. Doesn't mean he was off limits for the defense. Now, the other thing that was I missed in that little beginning commentary, was that he was worried that there could be witnesses of James Safechuck being abused. I never really heard Tom say that before. Witnesses of James Safechuck being abused. Interesting. Let's go further.
Well, if the defense had brought him in as a witness, that would have opened the door for the prosecution in a rebuttal case to call in their witnesses about whether or not Mr. Safechuck had been molested. But it makes no sense for the defense to keep Mr. Safechuck available to call as a witness at that point.
And what about the story of Michael Jackson calling James Safechuck in the middle of the trial, intimidating him and desperately demanding that he testify? Does that sound like the client that you knew?
No, the Michael Jackson I know doesn't intimidate anybody and would not have contacted him and tried to scare him or threaten him. That doesn't make any sense to me.
So you believe that's untrue, based upon your knowledge?
I don't believe Mr. Safechuck was contacted by the defense throughout the trial. I don't believe that, because it was very clear before the trial started that any allegations about Mr. Safechuck were off limits.
So you don't believe he was contacted by the trial, but you have no idea if somebody behind your back did it. Because that's what you said earlier. And the idea of Michael Jackson contacting him, that just doesn't sound like him. Well, guess what, Tom? There's a lot of things that don't sound like Michael Jackson because, again, you were hoodwinked. It's not hard to understand. And even if maybe you weren't, maybe this is, you're trying to get and salvage part of your legacy. I don't know. I really don't know. But I'll tell you this much. I don't think you're that, how should I put it, unaware of the magnitude of the inappropriate actions of Michael Jackson. Even taking the sexual aspect out of it, I don't think you're unaware of that. But let's go further.
Now, one of the things that has actually gotten some fair media coverage and has contradicted the narrative of Leaving Neverland is that over the last several weeks, it has been revealed that a prime location where James Safechuck now claims, many, many years later, that he was molested by Michael Jackson was the famous Neverland train station, the second floor of the train station. And he claims that in the movie and in his lawsuit, that his abuse ended in 1992. And we now know that the construction of the train house didn't even begin until late 1993 and didn't finish until somewhere in the middle of 1994. The director, Dan Reed, has claimed that doesn't mean anything because he's just going to extend the date beyond which James Safechuck was actually abused, which then would make him 16 or 17 years old.
No, it wouldn't make him 16 or 17 years old. It depends on when the date is. It would have made him 15 or 16. I love how these people stretch information out. Mr. Ziegler, get your facts straight. The other thing you don't seem to realize is that gentleman that just came out, the photographer, that stated that Neverland, that the train station was actually up before the permits were there. Now, the permits are dated 1993. They're dated 1993. So how could somebody who stated that the permits weren't there and Michael Jackson didn't want pictures of the train station being taken before the permits were there, how can he state that and the permits were dated 1993? It happens all the time. A lot of these people who are, not even with wealthy people, just people in general, what happens is they put buildings up and then they ask for the permits to be someone to come in, they grease somebody's palm or whatever it is, and then they get the permits granted. And if you're Michael Jackson, where you can kind of do whatever the heck you want, why wouldn't he do that? he was somebody that just did whatever the heck he wanted. Why wouldn't he say, I'll just put the building up and I'll just have somebody deal with the permits later because I want my building up. I mean, that's one possibility. The other possibility is what James Safechuck didn't want to come forward about him being abused as being an older teenager. Maybe he felt that was just a little bit too much to divulge. I mean, there's many reasons. You're sitting there laughing at it, which doesn't surprise me, because that's the type of person you are. You can't, again, start feeling empathy, not just for Michael Jackson. Maybe start thinking about what you're stating. Maybe have a little bit of empathy for somebody else. Can you possibly do that? Can you muster that? Because I think you're a little laughing at the fact that James Safechuck was having a difficult time recalling trauma, and he could have possibly been raped. You don't know for sure. And it sure looks that Michael Jackson acting completely inappropriate with these people. It's beyond belief, but let me go further.
I have a couple questions about this, but what's your first gut-level reaction to that shift in story as a defense attorney?
Well, I don't believe these accusers. I just don't. I got to know Michael Jackson very closely during that terrible ordeal that he went through in Santa Maria in that courthouse. I got to know him. I sat with him through a 5-month trial. I saw him reacting to some of the most horrific allegations you could have. I mean, people forget just how awful these allegations were. He was being accused of masterminding a criminal conspiracy to commit extortion, to abduct children, to falsely imprison a family. He was being accused of giving a cancer-stricken child alcohol to prepare the child to be molested. I mean, these were horrible allegations. I sat with him throughout that trial. I worked with him before the trial. I saw him after it. There's no doubt in my mind he was not a child molester. He was not a child abuser and would never hurt a child, period.
You sat with him in a courtroom. You spent time with him. And somehow you, Tom, you should be working for the FBI because you seem to have these intuitive ways, almost like, people that they say who are gay have gaydar. Somehow you seem to have this method of knowing when somebody's going to abuse a child. That somehow is within your realm of magic. How should I put it? Capabilities. No, Tom, you don't. You can sit with him from here to tomorrow. From here to 20 years from now. The reality is that unless you were in that bedroom, you don't know anything. And the reality is that if that was the case, then most of these people that are committing these crimes against children, it would be easy. You could easily tell. The point is that you can't. That's the whole point. You being in the courtroom, him reacting, oh my God, this is awful, doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything at all. What it means is that he was very good, Tom Mesereau, see that side of him as a human being. And I keep on stating this. The people that are going to see that side, the only people that are going to see are the ones that are getting abused. You weren't getting abused, Tom. Maybe used, in my opinion, but not abused. Let's go further.
So when I hear these allegations suddenly popping up years after his death, they make no sense to me. I don't believe them. And my experiences with particularly Mr. Robson suggest to me there's something radically wrong with these accusations.
But, all right, so let's take the train station thing a little bit more specifically. If this were to go to a traditional trial, what would you, Tom Mesereau, as a very experienced and esteemed defense attorney, what would you do with that kind of a shift in story that doesn't just change something that's minor? Oprah Winfrey tried to pretend that this was a minor mismemory. This totally changes the timeline. It changes when he was abused, how old he was. Supposedly Michael Jackson stopped being interested in these boys when they hit puberty, but now James Safechuck is a very old, mature, and tall 16, 17-year-old. What would you do if you were cross-examining James Safechuck in a situation like this?
What would you... That's really funny, John. Someone's trauma is really funny. What happens, I don't think people understand. There's different forms of despicable. There really is. And you sitting there like you are the Cheshire cat with the bird in your mouth is really, really just, how should I put it? It's really disturbing. It's rather, it's what anyone that survives abuse, when you see someone like this who is taking this as some sort of joke, and that's what I think he's doing, by the way, taking it as some sort of joke and not taking it seriously because he doesn't believe the victims. Well, guess what, John? You know what? There are a lot of victims who are not believed who are actually telling the truth. And for you to sit there, and the way you're doing it, it's almost in this shameful type of manner that you're doing this, and to do it with such delight is rather disturbing. It's really, really rather disturbing. And, what would you do with this information? Well, you know what? What happened with the information with Jerry Sandusky's adopted son when he went in front of a grand jury and said that Jerry Sandusky, his adopted father, never harmed him, and then came out later on in the trial to say he wasn't being forthcoming. Okay? And Jerry Sandusky now is in prison for doing a whole lot of awful things. You gonna laugh at him? Do you want to laugh at him? Do you want to make fun of him? I know that your friend there, Tom Mesereau, thinks that the Sandusky case deserves a second look. And a lot of people, I think yourself too, if I'm correct, John, I think it is you, think that the Sandusky case deserves a second look as well. They seem to be touting Dottie Sandusky around. It's unbelievable the amount of crap that CSA survivors have to deal with. It is absolutely unbelievable. But let's go further. Again, John, you really, really don't know how to interview somebody. I understand that you want to get your point across, but you're sitting there complaining about how everything's one-sided, but this is nothing literally. You and Tom Mesereau should be skipping around in daisies. That's how much of a fluff piece this really is. Let's go further.
Defense lawyer's dream. I don't know if you remember during the Michael Jackson criminal trial, one of the accusers said that he had been shown a particular magazine as a grooming process. And we proved that the magazine had been published long after this person left Neverland. Evidence like that can be devastating. If Mr. Safechuck said he was molested in that train station and the station hadn't even been built, that could be devastating evidence for a jury in judging credibility.
Now, I know you're not involved in any of these cases directly, but what do you make of what the estate is doing in trying to come to a way to adjudicate these claims? Obviously, with Michael Jackson dead, there's no such thing as defamation against a dead person. What is your evaluation of what the options are and how the estate is proceeding legally to try to clear Michael Jackson's name here?
Well, I'm not involved in any of the civil suits by Mr. Robson or Mr. Safechuck. I have not participated in any of the court hearings. I've not reviewed any of the documents. I wasn't present for any depositions. I don't know what people have said or not said in the court.
But yet you've gone on many interviews, Tom, and you've commented on those cases. You've gone on several interviews. It's as soon as the allegations were released, you went after against Mr. Robson. You didn't even read the allegations. You did that with Bill Cosby, by the way, too. Made a total fool of yourself, in my opinion. For people who want to see, look up Tom Mesereau. I think it was on CNN or I posted it on the Facebook page. It was literally him talking about Bill Cosby before he was hired to defend Bill Cosby, saying, I don't really know anything about the case. And then he gives his opinion, by the way, and talks about how the accuser in that case, that Bill Cosby was an older gentleman. There's no way that he could have had sexual contact with that accuser. It just doesn't make any sense. But because he didn't even read the cliff notes on the case, he didn't realize that Bill Cosby admitted to having sex with the woman, that he said it was consensual sex. And then when that was brought up to him, he didn't backtrack and say, oh, well, yeah, but it just still just doesn't make any sense for a man of that age, because he didn't understand. And then he brings up, well, you know what? She was obviously looking for money, that she went into a civil suit and got a judgment. And then they had to bring up to him, but Tom, you don't realize she actually wanted to do a criminal filing. She went to do a criminal filing first, and the DA wouldn't go with it. So then she had to file a civil suit. Oh, well. And then I backtrack again and talk about, well, she probably did a criminal trial, because if you win a criminal case, you can just walk over to the civil court, and then you just get a judgment. Because he didn't do his homework. My personal belief on Tom Mesereau, this is my only opinion, is that he has a whole bunch of people that do the research for him, and what they do is they hand it to him, and he regurgitates it. Personal opinion. He just puts it into the, what I call law speak, and regurgitates it. Because if you're going to go on a national interview and not even know the cliff notes of the Bill Cosby case, but which at that point was widely known, that's pretty poor. That's poor form. But let's go further.
Of course, of the lawsuit, so I can't really speak directly on that issue. My perception at a distance is that the estate is being very, very aggressive and very effective in trying to protect the name and the likeness and the image and the reputation of Michael Jackson. I'm actually very impressed with the aggressive approach they've taken, and I hope they continue it, because these accusations are scurrilous. I've not seen the film, Leaving Neverland. My understanding is they don't ever talk to anyone on the other side. They basically accept Mr. Robson and Mr. Safechuck's accusations. And remember, we're talking years after accusations like this were made. We're talking about people who would have had plenty of time to look at the details very closely of what accusations other people have made. And if you're going to either intentionally or unintentionally pattern yourself after prior allegations, there would be plenty of time and plenty of information available for one to study, if that's what you're doing. I don't know whether these people really believe what they're saying or not. I mean, the longer I walk through life, the more I realize human beings have a way of convincing themselves that what they're saying is true, even if it looks ridiculous.
I agree, Tom, and you do that very well, actually. You convince yourself of a lot of things that really boggle the mind. You have a client that spent multiple nights. And even in the 2005 trial, one of the people stated that one of the people that were defending Michael Jackson, that one child spent over 300 consecutive nights with your client. That Michael Jackson would take children, and they would show up at his house, and he would sleep in the child's bedroom in his bed. That Michael Jackson would take children on tour, take them out of school and on tour and sleep in the same bed. That, to me, sounds like somebody convincing themselves by saying, well, he just didn't understand, or he was just a wonderful person. You don't think that goes beyond belief? You don't think that goes beyond the essence of credibility? Are you kidding me? You can't see that other side of it. As just a normal, walking human being, you can't say, well, gee, yeah, that is totally inappropriate. And anyone that behaves in that manner, if there are accusations that come forward, we need to take them seriously, because that is not appropriate behavior for anybody. You'll never say that. Oh, no. You'll defend it, didn't have a childhood, all this other nonsense. Instead of heading it straight on. And you need to complain about Leaving Neverland. But I see a lot of your interviews, there's no pushback. Look at this interview. This interview is a joke. It's literally a joke. It is literally nothing but verbal masturbation is what it is. It's you people talking and fluffing it out to no end, and there's no real substance. There's no meat on the bone here. And you sit there and you talk about people convincing themselves. I agree. The more and more I see people like you, yes, I agree. There are people who are delusional. Personal opinion.
So they may actually believe what they're saying is true. I don't know, but I certainly don't.
You mentioned that Leaving Neverland doesn't give any of the other side, which is 100% accurate. The most glaring...
No, it's not 100% accurate. There was Michael Jackson who put out that glossy video. Remember when he said Michael Jackson wasn't here to defend himself? In 1993, that's how Michael Jackson did defend himself. He went on, but basically satellite time. What he did is he literally had that beamed all over the world and had to buy satellite time to have that beamed all over. So it was all aired at once live. And that was really his defense. And then what he did was he hid behind his lawyers. And in 2003, in the 2005 case, what he did was, again, he put out a glossy statement, and then he had Tom Mesereau essentially do his bidding for him. First it was Mark Garagos, then it was Tom Mesereau. And essentially what they did is they basically did his bidding, and they basically talked for him. Okay, what's happening now? The only thing we don't have is a glossy video. That's it. Everything else is the same. We have Tom Mesereau sitting there talking about Well, how he doesn't believe Wade Robson and James Safechuck, and this is all about money. You have the MJ estate and their lawyers doing the same thing. What has changed? Seriously, what has changed? It's you people, the talking heads for the estate, again, putting children on the lowest part of the ladder, on the lowest scale you possibly can, which you guys do so well. Oh, I really care about real victims. Well, guess what? You don't know what real victims are. You don't understand what the fact that you don't determine what a real victim is, because unless you were there 100%, you don't know. That's the problem. And every time you do this, what you do is you drive people who are trying to get their voices heard deeper down and deeper down and deeper down. That's why this type of live stream and live streams all over the internet are so important, because it's one of the few voices out there, not just this program, but a whole bunch of them, that are pushback, that are holding these people accountable, that are holding the people that defended Jeffrey Epstein and got him a bargain of a deal. We talk about things that are inconceivable. Look at the Jeffrey Epstein situation, what he got for time. And this is a person that was actually, basically deemed a child predator. I mean, it's just, it really, really boggles the mind. And then you have these people, these John Zieglers of the world, that are essentially doing the bidding, whether they want to or don't, or maybe they're just getting a high off it, I don't know, for the Michael Jackson estate. Let's go further.
Witness in this whole thing that they omit totally from even being mentioned is Brandy Jackson, the niece of Michael Jackson, who dated Wade Robson for 8 years, including 2 years during which Wade now claims he was abused.
Oh my God. John, are you seriously bringing up Brandy Jackson? Are you seriously bringing up Is that the level you're going to go to? First of all, I haven't seen any pictures of Brandy Jackson. I think I saw one picture of an LA Gear commercial. I haven't seen any where is really Brandy Jackson and Wade Robson, in a couple relationship. But let's just even say that's true. Let's say they dated. What difference does it make? He didn't tell his wife. He didn't tell his mother. He didn't tell his sister. He didn't tell his friends. Do you think Brandy Jackson's going to know? And do you think that Michael Jackson is a fool that he didn't realize that Wade Robson was getting older and he was not showing an interest in him anymore? So what he probably did was say, hey, here's my niece. You have an interest in her. Let me slowly push you off to her, but then keeping him in tow because he's still now part of the Jackson family. That's the control, genius. John, that's the control. You don't seem to get this. That's how he controlled these individuals. He kept them close by him. Oh, Brandy Jackson. Seriously. I don't know if I have to look at your background. I have no idea if you have any journalistic credentials whatsoever. I know. And I know I'm a blogger. I know I do things on YouTube and stuff like that. I know where I stand. But if you really have any journalistic integrity and you're bringing up Brandy Jackson, that is pathetic. That's bottom of the barrel pathetic. But let's go further. It's just
by Michael Jackson. Brandy is sure that Wade is not telling the truth, and she knew him exceedingly well. If, in a prosecution case, Wade Robson had testified without ever mentioning Brandy Jackson, and you as a defense attorney was able to show the jury, hey, you never got told about a Brandy Jackson. Here she is, and here's her story. How do you think that would impact a jury's view of a story like that?
Well, I don't know what he allegedly told Mrs. Jackson. I'm really not knowledgeable about that relationship. I believe what she's saying. I believe he never raised the issue because it never happened. But I'm not a witness to any of this. I just know I looked.
Wah. Another trying to get all excited and revved up and juiced up about Brandy Jackson. Tom Mesereau essentially says, well, I don't really know. I don't think Tom Mesereau thinks it would have made a big difference. I really don't. I don't think Tom Mesereau really thinks Brandy Jackson is really anything special when it comes to these allegations. And again, John, you're actually doing Tom Mesereau a disservice at this point. I mean, it's pathetic. It's literally pathetic. But let's go further.
This person in the eye, and I chatted with him extensively, and his mother and sister were sitting right there too. And I believe he told the truth in the trial. I believe he told the truth to me. And the new stories, the new versions make no sense to me whatsoever.
What I find funny is you find him credible when he's telling you the things that you want to hear. And you find him a nice guy and very forthcoming and all this. But when he says something you don't want to hear, he's no longer credible. He's credible at one point, but no longer. Again, this is the reality. The two can mutually exist. He could be telling you what at that point in time he was ready to tell you, or ready to disclose. And then now he's an adult. He is, again, this takes 15, 20, 25 years to come forward. This is not something that's out of the realm of possibility. He's now coming forward and giving you information, and you just don't want to hear it. Do you ever think of that, Tom? Do you ever think maybe you just don't want to hear it? So that's why you're not. If he was that credible before, why can't he be credible now? You know, again, if you understand how disclosure works, you get it. But if you don't and you put blinders on, I mean, you got to put blinders on with that haircut. I mean, geez Louise here. Yeah, I've always used to call Tom, I still do, the male version of B. Arthur. I mean, I hate to go, but it doesn't work anymore, Tom. I hate to break the news to you. You might want to consider a new style. It's like a Little House on the Prairie gone bad here. But let's go further.
Talk to me about the media. I know that you have been very critical of the way the media has treated Michael Jackson in general, and specifically how they responded to the 2005 verdict, which they clearly did not like. I was part of that media that was, as a talk show host in Los Angeles, I was surprised by the verdict, but I thought it was legally correct because I did not.
Howard Stern puts this best, and he was talking about interview I played with Howard Stern and LaToya Jackson, Corey Feldman. And he was talking about how Michael Jackson was complaining about the media at the time. And he says, it's amazing how Michael Jackson never complained about the media when they were fawning all over him. But as soon as something like this comes out, what did Michael Jackson expect? The media to say, oh, well, you've been accused of child rape. Oh, let's sit there and promote your new video instead. Let's just ignore the allegations. We're not going to sit there and we're not going to look at it in any sense of a logical manner, that you have a grown man spending an inordinate amount of time alone with children who in 2003 now was the second accused, and they found out there was actually a third one because there was two at that point that got paid off. And that's what the media knew. And there was other stuff that media didn't know, according to Jim Clemente, that, who knows? They might have even been fed some of this information. They just couldn't make it public. But are you really expecting the media to sit there and say, yeah, we're not going to, really discuss about how disturbing this is and really go that direction. We're going to talk about how poor Michael Jackson was misunderstood because he didn't have a childhood and he just liked sleeping with little children. Is that the responsible thing for the media to do? Seriously. Is that what you think is responsible? Instead of saying, no, this is totally ridiculous. He should never be spending time alone with children, unrelated children, and sharing a bed. It goes against societal norms. It's not okay. But you'd expect the media to say, oh, well, let's replay his Thriller video again. I mean, come on, John. Please.
Not believe that the prosecution had proven their case. At that point, I was still naive about the facts of all of this, and I thought, well, there must be something there for them to go this far. Now, I've totally changed my mind.
Something there. The man took little children alone in a bed. You didn't think there was something there? Are you that serious? I put an interview out. It was a comedy interview with D.L. Hewley, and the interview was kind of pushing him because he was saying that he believed Wade and James, and he thought that Michael Jackson was abusing children. And he looked at him. Basically, you couldn't see the interview, but you could see he was looking right at him. He said, if you had a 35-year-old man that wanted to sleep alone with your child, would you just allow that to happen? And the interviewer said, hell no, I would never allow that to happen. And you sit there and say, there's nothing there? Are you kidding me? Michael Jackson doesn't get a pass because he's famous. Period. The behavior was beyond disturbing. That's why the media picked up on that story. And it got worse and worse as you heard more and more and more of what was really happening. Oy vey.
Getting to know you and researching this after leaving Neverland, but what is your evaluation of the media just deciding to blindly accept ridiculous allegations that are contradicted by voluminous evidence simply because it fits a narrative that they like?
Oh my God, you are just voluminous evidence. How much evidence do you need for Michael Jackson? 2 cash settlements. 1 child accurately describing the underside of Michael Jackson's genitalia, and you can pretend and you can go to all the MJ fanatic sites you want and pretend that never happened. It did. The lead investigator corroborated this, and we're finding out that Gavin Arvizo corroborated this from Jim Clemente. The fact that Michael Jackson, it was almost a federal case brought against Michael Jackson from the FBI, that they wanted to get him on interstate child transport for illegal activity with Jordan Chandler. Jordan Chandler, we find out now, was actually going to have the federal case brought up because he said that if the Arvizo case didn't go the way that it should go, that he was willing to bring into a federal case. He was willing to testify. And the fact that you have, Michael Jackson admitting to spending night after night with various children alone and advocating for that behavior. The fact that you have, now we're finding out from the FBI, Jim Clemente, that there were 4 hard drives that were destroyed in a room where there was an easy chair and Vaseline. Okay? Are you seriously stating that there's nothing there? Seriously. Are you that tense? You're supposed to be a grown adult. You're a grown man. You can't see that information. You're sitting there trying to pick away at Wade Robson and inconsistencies. And the reality is inconsistencies happen for people that are in trauma. That's normal. What's not as normal is a grown man behaving the way Michael Jackson did with children. That's not unheard of. That's disturbing. That is what's lunacy. Let's go further.
Well, the media is a business. They're in the business of generating revenue and getting ratings. And that's their number one priority. Their number one priority is not justice or fairness. It's shock value, it's controversy, it's colorful experience. The media wants what business requires, and you can't keep that out of your mind, because if you think they're out for fairness or justice, you're naive.
So the media, now you supposedly Michael Jackson has all these millions of fans, okay? So you have a built-in audience right there, okay? You have these fans that are so fanatic that they'll fly all over from the world to go to the trial. You have books coming out about Michael Jackson that are negative that didn't really sell. And then you have books that are coming out about Michael Jackson that are positive that sell like hotcakes. You have all these tribute shows. You have all this information about Michael, all these things that are coming out about Michael Jackson is scooped right up. And the media is a business, but yet they don't see the dollar signs about placating the Michael Jackson fans. Seriously. You don't think that a CEO is looking at that and saying, well, wait a second. That's in my opinion, what Aphrodite Jones did. Aphrodite Jones said, hey, wait a second. There's all these people flying all over to look at the trial that are Michael Jackson fans. Do I write a book that's going to be, Michael Jackson, I think, was guilty? Or do I write a book that Michael Jackson was innocent? Because I have a built-in audience. Again, you make it sound like you're living in these media people living in a vacuum. They're not. They understand marketing. They understand when you have a group that big, do you placate to the people that maybe are advocates for child abuse or maybe see something going on with this? Or do you placate to the group that is going to throw out their hard-earned cash, which is the Michael Jackson fanatics? Let's go further. Here we go.
I remember after the Jackson acquittals, I had lunch with Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown, and his family. And he said to me, do you realize you cost the worldwide media billions of dollars when you acquitted him? Because he said the final chapter had to be a conviction, where they hauled him off to jail, where they brought him back for hearings, dressed in an orange jumpsuit and chains, without makeup, without his normal apparel, leading up to perhaps one of the biggest sentencings in American history. This is what the media wanted, and they were denied that when the jury said not guilty 14 times.
And then when they got afterwards was Michael Jackson ended up dying at the age of 50. And then it was all about how Michael Jackson was a legend and all the tributes. And let's have people come on from all over the place and talk how wonderful Michael. They parlayed that into a big business, Tom. Are you seriously telling me that the media didn't go that route when Michael Jackson passed away? That all of a sudden his history was essentially whitewashed, and now it was nothing but a love fest for Michael Jackson? The media will work with. So if Michael Jackson gets off, the media is going to find a way to parlay it into news. And they're going to find a way of making money out of it. You know, yes, the media would have loved, I'm sure, to see Michael Jackson in handcuffs. It would have been a very good picture. And it would have been a very good news, but there's only so much you can do with that. But Michael Jackson being a martyr and stretching that out for the amount of time they did, I think they made a whole lot more money off of that than they ever would if Michael Jackson just went to jail. You now have that martyr syndrome, and you can just draw it out. But unfortunately, now it's 2019, and that's now flipped. The script is flipped over. But let's go further.
So I will forever be scarred by that experience. I remember, when we walked into the courtroom set at counsel table, I looked around and I saw all these reporters with big smiles on their faces and a big gleam in their eye. They were so excited by what was going to happen that day. And after the last not guilty, I hugged Michael Jackson and looked, and I could see the disappointment in their faces. The story was over. The final chapter could not be written the way they wanted it to be.
Oh, so now you can read people's minds. Oh, how nice. You can actually read what's in the people's minds. Maybe they were upset because they felt that Michael Jackson was guilty. And that you had a man that was abusing children now walking free. Maybe that was, you don't know you can't go into somebody's mind, Tom. You have no idea what they're thinking. I mean, seriously, are you that obnoxiously, are you that obnoxious that you think you can somehow know what's going on through a reporter's mind? You have no idea why they were disappointed. But the reality is the news didn't go away. It's a whole now you just changed the news cycle. It's like literally, it's pathetic. Let's go further.
And business had suffered because of that. They had to abandon Santa Maria. They had to walk on to some other subject, and it was very disappointing to them. Justice is not their goal. Ratings and revenue are what they want.
Amen to that. Okay, so one more.
And you're talking to somebody who is a reporter, and what is his goal? Is there clicks and likes on the fact that he's going? Because, there's tons of videos out about Michael Jackson, people defending Wade Robson and James Safechuck. They don't get nearly the views of the people that are placating the Michael Jackson fans. So the person you're talking to, isn't he trying to get clicks and placating people? Again, that built-in audience. Isn't that the same thing? Am I missing something here? Look, I put out videos, they maybe get 1,000 views, 1,500. I'm not doing it for that. I could care less. But I'm looking at this video right now, and it's got almost 80,000 views. And it looks like 4.3 thousand likes and 100 dislikes. Who do you think's watching those videos? I would probably say Michael Jackson fans, the built-in audience. That's who I think he's placating to. Let's go further.
More big picture question here. That happened in 2005. We're now in 2019. In between, the cultural rules, largely because of the news media, have dramatically shifted, mostly because of the so-called Me Too movement. I'm curious.
First of all, it's not a so-called Me Too movement. It is a movement. And every single time you say that, John Ziegler, you're insulting people that have been brutally abused. Stop dismissing something because it doesn't help your argument. It's incredibly destructive. You know, it is literally kicking on the lowest people who are in the worst possible position, people who are rape survivors. You're literally kicking sand in their face because you want to score points with Tom Mesereau. What, Harvey Weinstein, what? That's just a fictitious story? Is that what you're saying? Bill Cosby, the man that you're sitting right in front of that lost miserably, was that just a fictitious story? We already know your views on Jerry Sandusky. We won't even go there, which I think is deplorable, but we won't even go there. You know, all these people that are coming forward, like I said, the Anthony Edwards, the people that are accusing Bryan Singer, the people that are going after Kevin Spacey, what happened with R. Kelly, okay? They mean nothing? Is that what you're saying? The so-called Me Too movement? You know, you really have to pick who you listen to in general. And I tried to reach out to this guy to try to get him to debate, and he won't. So, and another guy, the Thompson guy, C.E. Thompson, they won't. You know, the excuse is as well, you know, he's just some internet blogger or YouTube guy or whatever. That's not the point. The point is that it wouldn't be this sort of soft thing. They would be getting hit pretty hard and heavy, and it wouldn't be an easy interview. But let's go further. Again, it's a little bit distressing, but it's also just comical in the way how bad it is. It's just so. Again, it's like literally someone from a high school, you know, paper doing an interview. No hard-hitting questions. Nothing that's really going to give you some sort of substance. It's just literally pablum. Again, pablum, for people who don't know what it is, it's literally baby spit up. That's what that word means. Let's go further.
In general, and then also in specific with regard to Michael Jackson's case, how impactful has the rules being changed because of Me Too been on how these kinds of cases are evaluated in general? And specifically, do you think you could have gotten an acquittal in 2019 under the same circumstances with Michael Jackson today that you did in 2005?
Well, if you're talking about Michael Jackson, you have to remember how vicious the media was in 2005. I mean, the media worldwide were at best mocking Michael Jackson, at worst calling him one of the world's greatest villains. And the media had already convicted him. The media had already tried him and found him guilty. And the media onslaught.
Wait, what media? Most of that trial, if you actually look and go back, there are some mainstream networks that picked it up, but a lot of it was cable networks at the time that was showing the Michael Jackson case. You know, you got to realize CNN back in that time frame wasn't a huge player. They still really are not in many ways, but you know, you had a lot of, you know, I think the E! Channel was covering it. I think you had a Court TV and all these other sort of, you know, we're not talking huge channels here. And then you had some of the mainstream media covering it, and they were trying to make it fair and balanced. But the reality was that you had somebody who was accused now a second time, Tom, of something that's ridiculous. You know, he shouldn't have been accused the first time. Shouldn't have happened. He shouldn't have put himself in that position ever, but he did. And the fact that he did it a second time, and we found out even during the trial, it was a third time technically. Yes, the media is going to be somewhat relentless on that because it's just so unbelievable. You got to stop putting it in the fact that it was Michael Jackson. You got to realize if this was any 35-year-old man being accused of this, and this was the second, third time, yes, there probably any media attention, but there wouldn't have been much of a case. He would have been in jail. He got away because he had high-powered attorneys, and he had people, and he had a big money backing behind him to be able to shift the narrative. And you had a jury foreman that had this brilliant idea, he wanted the smoking gun. Because that really always happens in child sexual abuse, especially with males. Because usually males, there's almost no, if any, physical evidence whatsoever. Let's go further.
To see him go to prison was so effort. I mean, it was, I don't know how to explain it. It never ended. It was a 24-hour cycle. Do I think it would have been harder to acquit him now? I actually don't, because the media pressure then was so bad. I don't think it could have been worse. During the week of jury deliberations, major networks were showing the jail cell he was going to go to. They were talking about what food he would eat, what schedule he would keep, whether he would be on suicide watch. All of it was designed to influence the jury to get a conviction.
The jury was sequestered. The jury didn't watch television, Tom. The jury didn't. When you're in a jury, you don't get to watch TV. You don't get to read the newspapers. To influence the jury, it's oh my God, it's unreal. You know, you're supposed to be a lawyer. You're supposed to know the basics. I'm not a lawyer, and even I know that. The jury did, on a trial like that, where you have every single eye watching the jury, do you really think that they're going to get away with being able to watch the cable news network? Are you serious? And if they did find out that they were watching, they would have been kicked off immediately? It's ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. Let's go further.
So in Michael Jackson's case, I don't think it could have been worse. But in terms of other people accused, it's a very, very troubling environment, because Me Too has a lot of good elements to it. I think to flesh out sexual harassment, or worse, sexual assault, the way it's being done, to some extent is very appropriate. The problem is that emotion is now substituting for due process. And if you're accused, before you have the ability to even speak up on your behalf, and before the rules even kick in to give you a fair hearing, you are condemned, you are fired, you are vilified. There's something wrong with that. We've had other movements in American history where emotion and passion replaced due process, replaced fairness. And I'm talking about the Salem witch trials. I'm talking about the anti-communist movement.
Are you seriously comparing the Me Too movement with the Salem witch trials, where people thought that in Salem, Massachusetts, that there were women that were practicing witchcraft, and they basically put them into a kangaroo court, and then they hung them? You are seriously comparing that to somebody like an R. Kelly, who married a 15-year-old, Aaliyah, who was seen with countless teenage girls, countless accusers, who has had countless accusations thrown at him, who is acted beyond inappropriately. Are you comparing that to somebody who's condemned as being a witch and then hung? Really? That's your analogy. The Harvey Weinsteins that are literally took young women, and he would just, to get them to give them a role, or to pressure them to do things, and literally shame them and assault them. That's what you're comparing to the Salem witch trials. That you had Bill Cosby, the person who defended it. How many accusers did he have, Tom? How many accusers? Where you literally had a plethora of people coming forward, stating the same stories over and over again, in a case that you lost, by the way. You're comparing that to the Salem witch trials. And there's no pushback from John Ziegler, just a smile probably, and, oh yeah, that makes sense. God, I mean, did he write these questions down in crayon? Does anyone know?
Talking about rounding up Japanese on the eve of World War II. America in its history has had phases where passionate movements take off and due process, fundamental fairness, the Constitution takes second fiddle.
Now you're comparing it to the internment camps for Japanese, for the Japanese during the World War II. And literally, you're comparing it to that. You don't think that these people that are being accused have high-powered attorneys like yourself? You don't think that that person that's maybe someone that's accusing Kevin Spacey, that was a busboy or whatever he was, is now going against one of Kevin Spacey's high-priced attorneys? You don't think that there's no difference, that it's in his favor, that he has maybe somebody that's a lower rung tiered attorney going after some who's $1 million paid attorney, who probably has influence, probably has connections, probably et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You think that there's a fair balance there? That a Jeffrey Epstein that was literally raping and found to be raping underage children, that literally his time was, 19 months or 8, whatever, how many months he spent in a private wing of a jail cell, where he was allowed to go home, basically get out of the jail cell for 3/4 of the time and fly wherever the heck he wanted to fly to, and then to return just to sleep there. You don't think that cries out being unfair? That you're trying to now, people that maybe have the lowest amount of resources that are going, you think the R. Kelly accusers, these people are rich people? Are you serious? Oh, yeah. Let's go further.
And we have to be very careful right now because some of that's going on.
Tom Mesereau, criminal defense attorney for Michael Jackson in the 2005 criminal trial. Thanks so much for your time. We'll continue this conversation on our podcast, which you can find on April 27th, 2019 for more of this, and find it at www.freespeechbroadcasting.com. Thanks so much, Tom.
Oh, yeah, that's free speech, all right. It's you basically having a fluff, like I said, verbal masturbation interview with Tom Mesereau. And what's funny is you didn't seem to ask him about the insurance company. Are you going to ask him that question, John? Maybe I missed it. Maybe it's in this podcast. Are you going to ask him about the insurance company? Because I don't know if it was you, but a lot of your peers are talking about how an insurance company, that video that went out, really paid for Michael Jackson's settlement. Yeah. Transamerica just thought it would be a wonderful idea to pay for Michael Jackson's settlement regarding child rape. That's what Transamerica just pays those settlements out like nobody's business. And maybe you should ask him about that, because Tom Mesereau came out and said that never happened. And that, if my recollection stands corrected, he actually got rid of Brian Oxman because he was trying to push that theory as well. The one that has the affidavit that says, an insurance company paid, and people think, that's the Rosetta Stone in that particular issue. My advice is take that affidavit, put it on a toilet roll, and that's pretty much what it's worth, in my opinion. Again, there's a lot of comical aspects to this. What it shows is they're crying out for, it to be fair and balanced, and how it was one-sided. But you get an interview like this, and there's tons of interviews like this. Tons of Tom Mesereau going on these various shows. And they're whining about a documentary that's come out that At least showed Michael Jackson denying the allegations. Showed the verdict in the 2005 trial. Showed Tom Mesereau sitting there talking about how ridiculous it was. Showed fans sitting there talking about how they felt about Wade Robson and Jane Safechuck. You know, this interview had nothing. It literally, John, has nothing. It's a nothing interview. You're seriously proud of this. You're seriously proud of this. Words can't describe. Now I'm gonna go and see if there's any people in the chat. I don't know. Probably not. Like I said, I didn't really give much of yeah, I don't think I see anyone in the chat. So I'm going to be putting this on. This will eventually get archived and put on, but you can watch later. But I hope everyone has a good night, and I will talk to you later.